Hi, I'm Sashi and welcome to session 2. Here we'll be talking about taxonomical classification and the use of taxonomy in homeopathy. Alright, so let's get on to just understanding some of the names that we come across quite often. Now, one of them is nomenclature. Nomenclature is the naming. It's an international system. It's a standardized system which we use to name all living organisms. Now, taxonomy is a system. It's not just naming, but in addition to naming, we also describe and classify all living organisms. Now, another word that you come across quite often is the rank. Now, what is a rank? Rank basically denotes the level at which an organism is placed within the taxonomical hierarchy. Now, how do we actually classify where a particular organism is placed? Okay, so this is dependent on comparative DNA, morphology, anatomy, and also comparison of the chemical compounds present. So this slide here gives you an idea of the whole evolution. Okay, this is a pictorial evolution as how human beings have evolved right from unicellular organisms. Now, in the past 250 years of research, taxonomists have named about 1.78 million species of animals, plants, and microorganisms. Yet, the total number of species that is unknown is probably between 5 and 30 million. Now, this is something quite interesting, at least I find it quite interesting, because there's so many species still undiscovered. That means it's still not been named. We have no idea where they fit into the hierarchy. So keep this in mind. Although we use taxonomy to make our lives much easier when we learn plant remedies or animal remedies, there are still so many species that we do not know. And this whole hierarchy is always in a state of flux. Now, in 1735, Linnaeus classified all life into animal and vegetable kingdoms, and he introduced the binomial nomenclature. Now, what is binomial nomenclature? That is the word that we use, bi meaning two and nom meaning name. So this is the word we use where every living organism is described as having two names. The first name is the genus name and the second name is the species name. It's like how we are called as by our first name and a surname. Like that, all living organisms have the binomial nomenclature. So the first name is genus and the second name is species. The genus name is always started, when you write, it's always with a capital. The species name always starts with a small letter, and there's always a gap between the two. Okay, this is called as binomial nomenclature, and this was introduced by Linnaeus. Since then, there have been a lot of changes in the taxonomical hierarchy. In 1990, we have Woos, who proposed the three-domain system of classification. That's bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And then in 2012, Lutica comes and proposes the five-dominion system, in addition to the traditional three, that is the bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Now, there have been so many of them. Depending on when you've done or studied taxonomy, depending on that, if you were to ask how is life classified, each one will tell you whatever they were taught. Like, for example, when I was taught and when I learned taxonomy, I had only prokaryotes and eukaryotes. We never had bacteria and archaea or virus and everything as separate kingdoms. So keep that in mind, because when you read a book based on this classification, you will see the differences. So don't get too worked up or don't get fazed by the differences over there. Just look at the date when it was done. Okay, so this gives us the idea of the ever-changing landscape of nomenclature, and with it, the rank of any given species. Now, what are the main hierarchy of taxonomy? What is it? All life is divided into kingdoms, into the whether it be birds or whether it be reptiles or whether it be mammals, it will come under the kingdom. And then you have, under the kingdom, you have many phylum. And under the phylum, you have orders. And orders are still further divided into different families. And families in turn are divided into genus. And genus is again divided into species. So the species is the most specific and a domain or kingdom is the most broadest. Okay, now don't go away with the idea that, you know, that under one genus there have to be lots of species. You could have just one species under a genus, or one genus under a family, or you could have multiple. Like sometimes you can also have species and a subspecies of a species. So depending on the hierarchy and the mode of classification, you could have various subgroupings. But these are the main divisions: domain, kingdom, phylum, order, family, genus, and species. Okay, so what is a species? A species is defined as a potentially interbreeding group of organisms that can produce viable offspring that themselves can interbreed. So that means a species is a group of organisms that are capable of interbreeding, and one species cannot interbreed with another species. Okay, so animals of two different species, like a horse and a zebra, cannot interbreed unless it's a hybrid. Hybrid is not natural, so it's something that we interbreed, like two species of, let's say, like foxglove or some kind of an ornamental plant which you want it for its, some characteristic that we want to see, like a beautiful flower or something. So in that case, when we interbreed, that is called as a hybrid. So they are two species forced to interbreed. Okay, but a species by itself cannot interbreed with a different species, only with members of its own species. Now, a genus is a group of species sharing certain common characters. A family is a group of different genus or genera sharing certain common characteristics, and so on and so forth. As the pyramid, from a species, it becomes more and more broader. Like I was telling you, a hybrid is when two different species interbreed. Now, you remember we were talking about the binomial nomenclature, where every animal or living organism is given two names, that of the genus and the species. So what happens if it's a hybrid? Okay, how do you know it's a hybrid? So what they've done is, in a hybrid, you have the binomial name of both the species, and they're separated by an X. For example, Digitalis lutea, if it is crossbred with Digitalis purpurea, then you have the hybrid, where you write it exactly like nomenclature, binomial nomenclature, but the two names are separated by the X. Okay, we've already gone through what is the taxonomy basics. We've talked about the kingdom, the phylum, the class, order, family, genus, and species. This is the primary taxonomy. Now, the secondary is the still further divisions within each. So, kingdom can be sub-kingdom, a phylum can be subphylum or a supraphylum. They are minor divisions within the broader division. And who decides all this? It's the International Committee on Taxonomy. They meet periodically, and whatever changes need to be made, they make it. And what is the changes that they make? What is it based on? It's based on basically the scientific discoveries or some kind of a DNA analysis, carbon dating techniques, all these, or also discovery of a new species. Any of these that has taken place between one meet and another is what makes the changes. Okay, now how is all this important to us learning homeopathy? Remember that all our medicines are sourced from animal, plant kingdoms, okay, and also from bacteria, viruses, okay. So, wouldn't our study of materia medica be much more simpler if we could group them and learn the group characteristics and then fine-tune it for each medicine under that group? It's based on this line of thinking that study of taxonomy and study of medicines based on taxonomy was introduced into homeopathy. And therefore, knowledge of taxonomy has also become important in the study of homeopathy. Now, how is the taxonomy based in homeopathy? So you have the universe and you have the animate and the inanimate groups. Animate groups are the living and the inanimate groups are the non-living medicines sourced from the non-living substances. For example, minerals, all the minerals will come under the inanimate group, and so will the medicines sourced and grouped under imponderables. Example of an imponderable would be the sun, the medicine called as Sol, or medicine made from X-ray. Yeah, this would come under imponderables. Now, what about the animate kingdom? The animates would be divided into prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. Means nucleus. So prokaryotes means before the nucleus, before the formation of a nucleus enclosed with a nuclear membrane. So those are the prokaryotes. So these are very primitive organisms. These are divided into the bacteria and the virus. The eukaryotes are those animals and plants which have got a distinct nucleus covered by a nuclear membrane. Now, under the eukaryotes come the protista, fungi, plants, and the animals. Now, protista is a funny group because protista has got all those organisms which cannot be classified under plants or animals or fungi. And the only common feature for them is that they are all eukaryotes. They could be unicellular, they could be multicellular, they could be autotrophs or heterotrophs. Autotrophs is those organisms which can make their own food. Heterotrophs are those that are dependent on something else to give them their nutrition. So, protista, coming back to protista, they can be autotrophs, they can be heterotrophs, they can be unicellular, multicellular. They could live they're usually organisms which live in water, but you can also find them living in soil, moist soil, or in the human body. Okay, so what are the main groups in homeopathy? You have the animals, plants, you have the fungi, you have the Monera. Monera is oleobacteria. You have the virus, and from the inanimate or non-living, you have the minerals and the imponderables. And in this slide, you also have a separate group called as the noosodes. Now, some people classify them as a separate group. Some people take the noosodes and see their source. They actually, if the source is from, let's take for example the noosode influenzainum. Influenzainum is from the human. If it's from the human, influenza, then it would come under the animal group. Okay, so depending on which deceased organism it's sourced from, they can either put it under animals or plants or fungi. Yeah. Okay, so let's have before we go into detail, let's just have a look at the classification of each one of them, very broad classification. So minerals are usually classified in homeopathy into the anions and the cations and their salts. And we use the periodic table, and we like the periodic table, all of us, we know that it's broken down into the rows and the series. So we learn the minerals based on which row it's in and which series it belongs to. Plant kingdom is divided into families, and we learn the homeopathic taxonomy and the materia medica based on plant families. Animals can be again broadly divided into the invertebrata and the chordata. Invertebrata are those animals without a backbone, and chordata are those with a backbone. And among the chordates would be your reptiles, birds, amphibians, and mammals. Yeah. Now fungi, it's again divided into the sac fungi, club fungi, zygote forming fungi, and the imperfect fungi. Those are classifications. In the next session, in the next chapter of this session, we'll see into further, I'll just start that sentence once again. We will be going into further detail about the classification of fungi slightly further down this session. Now, bacteria is again can be further classified into the gram-negative and the gram-positive bacteria, or the wall-less bacteria. Viruses are broadly classified into the DNA and the RNA virus. So this is the main classification that we'll be studying in further detail.